Hello, everyone. This is BigReed with another episode of Gaming's Lost Memories. This is episode 24, and today we will be talking about Metroid Prime. So, wanted to kind of define a few things, talk through a few things, then kind of set the tone. And I'm very chatty, and sometimes I have to remind myself to, get back to the main point when I answer a question, or somebody will ask me a question, or I'll have a thought, and I will speak for 60 seconds and then summarize by saying, well, to answer your question directly. So I apologize about that, but I did want to kind of set the tone a little bit and define a couple of things with Metroid Prime. So recently, I got a PlayStation 5, which I've been enjoying, and any of the, you know, exclusive games or the games that are on PlayStation, either PS4 or PS5, that I just have not had the time to play. I'm trying to allocate, some available free time to finish games like God of War, Kingdom Hearts 3, etc. Right? But I mean, geez, for the past 5 years, the Nintendo Switch has been my main console, and we'll be doing another podcast to talk about a fun little announcement and some of my initial thoughts regarding the Switch. But I absolutely love it, and it's so funny. Like looking back, and this is directly related to Metroid as well. But looking back, it was a fun time when there were portable consoles and also home consoles. And the reason that existed was because of the technology. The technology wasn't small, right? It was very difficult to have two batteries, or in sequence with the Game Gear, have 16 batteries power a screen, a game console, like do it all. You have your processor, you're trying to shrink this down. Like you look back and you go, like, you play a Super Nintendo game and then you play a regular Game Boy game, and you can vastly see the difference. Like the portable consoles used to feel like a generation or two behind. Nintendo dominated that space. I love the Game Boy. Then it migrated into the DS, and eventually sunset with the 3DS, and with the culmination of the Switch, Nintendo kind of combined it. So what's interesting about that is a lot of the games that I've purchased or have had downloaded for a while, I've been slowly going through and kind of just finishing them. I just, I'll pick an RPG or I'll pick a game. But long story short, Metroid Prime Remastered came out, I think, in 2023, so over a year ago. And I've had that downloaded, and I'm like, man, I started Kingdom Hearts 3, and I was like, man, this is just bringing me back to that time, GameCube, PS2 era, because it was fun, explaining it to everybody, like just about Kingdom Hearts and what I was seeing. But I was like, I don't know, I have Metroid Prime Remastered download on the Switch. I'll just jump into that. And I'll say just one word real quick. Wow. So I used to write reviews for video games. And what I really try to do is factor out the cost of a video game. Like when I reviewed, it was, should you purchase this game? Now, I would have some of my reviews for a while there had like, do you recommend it? Purchase it, this, that. There are certain games where I'm like, you just need to play this. Like if you're a gamer, you need to play it. Cost is irrelevant. But ultimately, gaming is an art, and it's an art that is marketed and treated as a commercial product. So it's we gamers, we exist in a weird space or a weird medium where it's not like you can go to a museum and just like look, at a piece of art and you're gaining something from it. Video games are designed to be interacted with, so your real appreciation comes from playing the game. So it's kind of unique in that space, right? And I look at it like when I reviewed, is there can be a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 game, and that's like, hey, you need to play this, right? Doesn't mean it's perfect. 10 out of 10 does not mean it is perfect. I really could not reiterate that enough. I don't think perfection exists at all. So I don't like that term being kind of thrown out with a video game, because I think you can play a video game that's like, dang, this is amazing. Everybody needs to play it. And, it still has some flaws. Like, nothing is ever going to be perfect. It's human created. That's just kind of where we lie. And that's my interpretation of it. Then I kind of segue, there's 10 out of 10 games, and I separate generational games. And that's what I wanted to define, kind of when we started this, was what is a generational game? To me, a generational game is like, it's almost hard to even rate it. Yes, it's probably a 10 out of 10, but everybody should play it, and people will be playing this for years and years to come. I think the first game where I've used that term in a review was actually Skyrim, and there were plenty of other generational games, but that's the first time that it like really clicked. Like while I was experiencing it, I have, oh geez, so it came out in 2011. So I've had what 20, 80. So we'll say 90, 2000. Yeah, so over 20 years of gaming experience. Now it's over 30. But at that time I had enough experience to know like this is going to be a treasured game. Like looking back in the other games where I played them, and I was like, whoa, like holy smokes. But Skyrim, I think, was the first time I've used that title. So what does that mean? It's like, it's a game that is so good and is having such an impact that it's going to be played for years to come. And Skyrim's a great example of that because it's been re-released 100 times. People still play it. People still talk about it. There's still tips and tricks and, secrets that are being found. And people are going to continue playing this game. Now, Elder Scrolls 6 might come out, and my fear, honestly, is it's not going to be good or anywhere near like Skyrim. And I remember watching Skyrim at E3 and just like seeing some of the gameplay, and you could feel the hype and the energy coming off of that title. So that brings us to Metroid Prime and why I wanted to define what a generational game is. Metroid Prime is a generational game. So in my opinion, not only is it a 10 out of 10 experience, yes, with issues, which we're going to talk through here in a second, but it is just one of those games you play. And having played a lot of games, and my threshold for JRPGs is my threshold for a JRPG being mediocre by most standards is pretty high. Meaning I like that category of games so much that if it's like, kind of just okay, I will like it, or I will probably be able to enjoy it as long as it's like a good game, right? And it's funny playing Metroid Prime, like soon as I turned it on, I was just like brought back because I wasn't that far into the game. I think I only played it because like I bought it, I started my save, I got past the very beginning. So the very beginning, you go in, there's this monster in a test tube thing, and you have to like dodge and shoot it. Then you get back on your ship and you crash, land on what, Talon 4 or whatever planet it is you're on. And like, it's basically like the tutorial pretty much. It's like maybe like a half hour long. I did that. That's where I left off. Like we landed on the planet, and that's where I was. So I basically was starting the game from scratch, and I started playing it. And I'm just like, holy smokes. I forgot how good this game was. So I did play it originally at the time, and this is a gaming's lost memory. This is a lost memory. I had an old TV, and a lot of those old TVs, before they started getting good, where it was 480p, those old tube TVs, like they got really good there in the 2000s. But I had TVs, from the 90s. And I think I was gaming on a TV from like 1988 for the longest time. But it was so old, it didn't have composite or component cables. You had to get an RF adapter and connect it through your cable line to display it, which that's just I can't believe like I did that on so many games. But second, Metroid Prime has a lot of darkness utilized, and part of it is gameplay oriented where you're literally in complete darkness, and then some of it is just I needed to be able to turn the brightness up on my TV, and I couldn't. There was not an option for that, nor I don't think my TV came with a remote. If it did, I had no idea. I never had a remote for that TV. But you could turn the TV on, you could turn the volume up and down, you could turn the channels. So originally when I got Metroid Prime, I I could not even play it. So at some point I traded it in because like it was so dark on the screen that the only way I could see is if I was shooting. So if Samus was, like shooting, the light would reflect, and then I could, kind of go from there and see. But I felt bad because I was like, I really wanted to play this game. I had the original Metroid. I did not have a Super Nintendo, so at the time I missed out on Metroid, or Super Metroid, excuse me, which is just another amazing game. So my experience was I can't see anything that's going on. I eventually traded it in. I rebought it later. So sadly, the original copy that I have is one of the not the collector's editions, but the greatest hits collection that Nintendo did with the GameCube, Player's Choice or whatever they called it, where it sold enough to warrant a reprint. So I still have it, and I did go back and replay it. At the time, I was like, holy smokes, this game is incredible. The controls are weird, but this game is absolutely amazing. Playing the remastered version, it reminds me, and it's another example and another reminder that certain game experiences, I hate when people are like nostalgia, and they utilize that as a negative to downplay the impactfulness or how good a game was. It's still amazing. And it's not even, first of all, it's not even that old a game. It's not even like we're talking about like the original Metroid. The Metroid Prime, you start playing it and you can tell this is a very special and unique experience. And I'm playing a very good video game. Like, this is a game where if you were trying to, showcase gaming more, gaming is something more, like something you can experience and walk away with like a feeling that might be different from, okay, well, you run around and shoot stuff. Well, then you play it and you're like, wow, I feel kind of isolated when I play this game. And it's like, isn't that interesting? Like, that you do feel isolated. You do feel a little nervous. Like, you don't know what's around the corner. You don't have all the answers. Like, the only things that you're interacting with are trying to kill you, and your character doesn't talk, which is a plus. That was a good choice. It's actually very refreshing with Samus as a character, but you can see things play out. You don't need to talk. But what's interesting is the story is essentially told through scanning. So let's do a quick breakdown of like, what is the gameplay like? First person adventure or first person shooter, however you'd like to think about it. Keep in mind, Metroid before this was a 2D side-scrolling, action exploration game, and they put it in the first person and somehow kept the soul of the series intact. It feels like a Metroid game, but you are in the first person, which honestly just feels and looks really cool. You have your blaster arm and you're just running around like blasting stuff. It's just a very cool perspective. But with that perspective is you kind of like put yourself, in Samus's field of vision. So as opposed to looking at her and watching her, jump up and down and do things, like you're in her actual first person perspective, which is very cool. There is a lot of shooting mechanics, but a lot of it is designed around the power-ups that you find. Obviously, this is Metroid. So there's, different suits, different beams that shoot out of your arm cannon, missiles, super missiles, morph ball. Like, there's all kinds of different things. And primarily, though, you're cycling between 4 different visors and 4 different main blaster weapons, right? So that's where a lot of the gameplay is kind of held together. And I read a quick statement before I jumped into this, and it was like one of the lead programmers or whatever of the game basically said, like, we didn't want the game to be really, really hard while you're exploring. Like, we want the challenge to be from exploration and figuring out where to go next and what to do. But then the bosses would be where your challenge is. And dang, is that true? But that's kind of how the game plays. We'll talk about bosses too in a second. Now, I do want to kind of start off with the control scheme, because I feel like that's the elephant in the room. And what's unique about Nintendo and why I feel it is very difficult to go back and play their catalogs is Nintendo creates hardware and they try to be innovative with it. And a part of that innovation is they tried to be different. Like, hey, we've already done this. We've already done this. Let's try something new. Now, that could be a double-edged sword, because sometimes Nintendo makes a bad choice, and sometimes it doesn't work out so well when they try to innovate something, and sometimes they make choices that revolutionize the video game industry. So Nintendo games are best, in my opinion, are best experienced on the original hardware, on the original game, like how it was at the time. More so than anything else. Like, I'll give you an example. Hooking up my GameCube is a pain in the butt. I actually found for $10 a Square gaming monitor that takes component cables. I'm like, I got it for $10 at a garage sale. I was like, this is absolutely awesome. It's not in perfect condition, but it's like, this was a cool find. You can pick it up. It's portable. Like, I can literally pick it up and, go put it on a table. But the PS2 uses regular component cables. So I can plug in, and it's perfect. 480p resolution on, a screen like that during that time is actually my desired way to play PS2, GameCube, etc. The GameCube had some type of progressive scan technology, so I don't know how well the third-party component cables work, but I hear not that great, and the actual official Nintendo GameCube component cables sell on eBay for like $150 at this time. So hooking up the GameCube with composite, it's just a pain in the butt. It's blurry. It doesn't look as good. PlayStation 2 I can hook up. It's 480p. It looks fine to me. You know what I mean? Like, they're older graphics, obviously, but it looks good. So playing Nintendo's old consoles and getting that experience is kind of a pain in the butt. And you look at how unique these the 64, like if you look at all of their controllers and then you get to the 64 and then you look at the GameCube, like they're so different and weird and unique. And ultimately, I can't believe I'm even going to say this, Metroid Prime at the time it released did not utilize the dual stick look around shooting mechanics where you use the triggers to shoot like we were accustomed to. I think it came out in 2001, so it was like early in the time where Halo was out and kind of showcased that, but it wasn't necessarily like commonplace. Like now you pick up any type of, console game and you grab the controller and you're going to use both analog sticks to kind of look around and move around and shoot, like it's pretty much like that in every single game at this point, especially if it's any type of shooter, any type of shooting game, any type of game where you're looking around and aiming, like that's the control scheme. It hasn't changed in 20 years. But you had to get there first. And of course, Nintendo makes this goofy GameCube controller with a tiny little C stick that's, not an analog stick. So at the time, it had a weird control scheme. But I think that's the preferred control scheme because that's how it was designed. And like, I played Remastered on the modern control scheme. So I have basically one full playthrough of each, right? On the old, I prefer it on the GameCube. I know it's crazy, but like being able to switch the arm cannon weapons with the C stick on the GameCube is the preferred method because the controls are a little tricky because they're a little floaty. They feel a little kind of unique but you use the D-pad buttons to change your visor, and you need to change your visor. There's like some situations where you need to actually be changing your visor around several times. So that alone, there's 4 different visors. That alone gets a little, tricky and confusing, especially like when you're fighting space pirates. And then the other thing is one of the other game mechanics they utilize is you'll need different beams to open doors for different enemy types. Like there's space pirates. They're infused with, I think the wave beam's the purple beam, but the wave beam. So you can only damage them using the wave beam. So that's unique. You run into an actual Metroid, which spoiler alert, they are in the game. You run into them and the ice beam. Let's start with this. The ice beam freezes them, so it's like awesome. Ice beam, missile. Hey, we found a solution for the Metroids, right? They're a big pain in the butt. They're killing all the space pirates. Yay. But yeah, you got, and then later on, as you're approaching the end of the game, then they can only be, you shoot them once and they split, and one's white that can only be killed with an ice beam, and one's red and can only be killed with a plasma beam, and you're like switching between beams, trying to scan stuff. Then they grab onto you. Then you got to go in the morph ball and drop a bomb. Needless to say, the control scheme, even on the modern controls, is not ideal, and switching to the original control scheme on the Switch does not work for me. It's I don't think it's bad, but just the way, I'll give you a great example. Smash Brothers is designed to be played on a GameCube controller, and I have a wireless GameCube controller for my Switch. So anytime, like me and my kids, we played Smash Brothers. I think it was yesterday or the day before. And I busted out the wireless GameCube controller. So my point with that is, like, Nintendo is so good with their hardware that honestly most of the time it's almost embarrassing for third-party developers. Now, with the Switch, most third-party developers are just coding their game to work on the Switch hardware. They're not really like designing it from the ground up, where in the past you basically had to, if you were going to make an exclusive Switch game, you had to or excuse me, a Nintendo game, you basically had to make it utilizing their controller, their hardware. Okay, well, I'm making a shooter. Great. That's not going to work with the GameCube. But Nintendo does such a good job of taking their hardware, taking their controllers, and making software that's absolutely awesome. So even with like underpowered hardware over the years, they figured it out. So it's possible. You just have to learn how to do it and not take shortcuts. And listen, if I'm a developer and I can make a game, on two of the other consoles and on PC, and porting it over is very easy, but it's a big pain in the butt and it's going to cost me a lot of time and money to make an exclusive version for the Nintendo console, I'm probably not going to do that. Luckily, that has gone away with the Switch and soon to be the Switch 2. But playing old Nintendo games is just tricky for me on the Switch. So the plus side is, you have all of these old games. They're re-releasing a lot, like Metroid Prime Remastered. They're releasing a lot of the games, which is like awesome. I think it's good. It sold over 1 million copies. The remastered version sold over 1 million copies, by the way, which is, I think, solid for what it is. A completely surprise release of a game, And I think it sold, I'm trying to think here. I think it was like regular game pricing, like $50 or something. But I don't regret buying it. It's such an amazing experience. So like being able to play it on the Switch hardware was still, incredible. There's some controller frustration. There really is, especially near the end where, you walk into an environment and it's all dark and you have to switch, visors, and you're doing this. You have to switch beams and switch missiles, and, shooting super missiles is a big pain in the butt. So I guess my point is like the original control scheme, everyone was like, this is awkward. But like looking back, I'm like, yeah, it's awkward, but it works for the game. Now, probably not a smart idea to make Metroid Prime, make a GameCube controller, and make GameCube hardware and be like, the best way to play this experience is with this unique controller. Like, you're making a game work for a controller, work for a hardware console. And it's like, well, don't you kind of want to just make the game and then it's adaptable to any type of control scheme or any type of... And listen, I know Nintendo's tried rectifying that. That's why, like, the Switch looks the way that it does. It's 2 analog sticks, 4 shoulder buttons. It's basically like the normal stuff, right? And they have that Pro controller, which I have 2 of. They're very handy. Like, it feels more like an Xbox controller. So they're fixing it. But it was funny. Like, before I kind of jumped into it, I was just thinking of this. I was like, I don't like playing, the old games, like, Super Nintendo games on the Nintendo Switch, for example, because everything just feels like it's mapped weird. I'm like, but you look at Sony and they might not innovate, or they innovate in weird ways, but you have a PlayStation 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 controller, which are very darn similar. So it's like, yeah, you want to play a PlayStation 1 game? It's going to pretty much play the same. You're just going to have triggers, which you might not even have needed at the time, or they would have done like, something monotonous. So that was kind of like my initial thought, is like the best way to play it, I do think, is with a GameCube controller, which is kind of funny. Like, I was just like, oh man, they designed this silly looking little purple controller, and it just like works really well for their games. You play Smash Brothers on it, you're like, oh nice, this is how it's meant to be played. Um, but the game, just jumping into the game, it immediately feels like a special experience. So as you're kind of rolling around, the story is told through, you know, very short movie sequences. I wouldn't even really say movie because it's like it's not like a CGI movie or anything like that. It's like just the regular game, kind of playing out from the third person with the original graphics. But you scan things. So you have a scanning visor, and there's thousands of things that you can scan in this game, anywhere from enemies to computer consoles to bosses to items, power ups, just random inanimate objects, water. Like you can scan anything and everything, and you get a data entry. One of the cool things, which I don't recall if the original had this, but there's a scanning log, and you can actually get up to 100% if you scan everything in the game, which is not something I'm gonna do. I got pretty darn close. I think my completion percentage across like everything was, I think like 80+% for the scanning log and like 71% I think for like all the missile packs and just exploration and everything like that. So as you're kind of going through, like you're scanning enemies, like in the beginning there's a space pirate that is dying, and it's like he's hemorrhaging internally, like so. And you get the space pirate data logs too, about all of the experiments they're doing throughout the game and like their interpretation of the Metro. And scanning bosses is really unique because it'll give you tips on like what to do. But it's just the story's told through that, which gives you more of that experience where it's an adventure game, but you feel very isolated. Everything around you is dangerous. You're exploring, you're trying to figure things out, you're trying to figure out where to go, and you're learning, and things start getting freaky because the Chozo, their planet has been poisoned, by Phazon, right? And Phazon is kind of the main driving force of the game, where the space pirates find this Phazon or bring the Phazon down, because I think it came from a meteor. Reading through the logs, like it hit the planet. Space pirates are like, "Ooh, what does this do?" It significantly expedites the evolutionary process of organisms. So they're running tests and putting Phazon in animals to see how much more aggressive they get, and of course they start like killing the space pirates. They're making super space pirates and jamming Phazon into them, and next thing you know, they're like 15 feet tall and trying to kill you. So that's kind of like the driving factor of the game, is that you're learning. And from the Chozo, they're more of like your tribalistic people who seek harmony with their planet. They're like a bird-like species. I think they're actually, I don't know if it was explained in this or explained in the past, but I think that, I don't want to say like they're Samus's parents. I'm trying to think of how Dredd explained the story, but it's like a lot of the technological gifts, I believe, came from the Chozo. I would have to think chronologically where the Metroid series kind of plays out, so that could be wrong. But you get this feeling of isolation because there's no more Chozo. Like, you're not finding them. You're finding space pirates, you're finding animals, you're finding these temples that are run down and poisoned, and they keep talking about, this poison that they're trying to just save whatever they have left. They're trying to preserve, they're trying to like prevent this from spreading. And like soon as you get into the Chozo, the temple areas and the overworld, the Talon overworld and everything like that, you're just noticing, like, as soon as you walk in, hey, the water's polluted. So the water's completely poisonous, right? And then, what's happening, like all these, bosses essentially, are growing huge, killing things, blocking things. Like, so it's very interesting, and it makes you feel alone because you're learning so much about these data entries, from this species that is no longer there, that it looks like they've been killed off. So you already kind of like feel creepy. You run into the space pirates. They're very clearly the bad guys here. They're just taking Phazon, doing bad things, trying to kill you. Um, you interact with the environment. There's not a lot of dialogue. Like there's no dialogue, right? And that is helpful because I feel like if Samus was just talking your ear off or like talking at you or reading data entries, which I think it could be done okay, but I feel like reading the text from what you're scanning is even better, and having Samus kind of like alone in her thoughts, like as you're exploring everything, makes you feel that solitude, which I feel like is very impactful from this game. It's like, okay, where do I go next? Where can I explore? And it's very fun. So there's, I want to say, 1, 2, 5, I believe, 5 total areas. I think 4 main ones, and then the Phazon Mines like near the end. And they all interconnect. So this is another like really interesting thing that works well with the Metroid formula, but also comes over from, you know, the older Metroid games. All of the areas are very different, which is cool. All of the music is incredible. In a lot of it will give you that, you know, melancholy feeling of just like, this seems like a sad place, but I'm not entirely sad. Like I'm intrigued, you know? Like you feel like something, it's all, it kind of reminds me of how people describe old battlefields where there was like a really, like Gettysburg, where there's a bad battle. You just have that weird energy that is there where like, you know, something bad happened, but you look around and like, you know, you see a grassy field, right? Or in this case, you see, you know, some snow drifts, or, you know, an old rundown temple. And it's like, but you feel the weird energy of like, it feels like something has happened here. Like where are these people? What are these artifacts? Why are they leaving me these clues? Like, are they looking for someone to come back and, you know, not save them, but rid the planet of whatever is happening so the planet lives on. It just gives you an odd feeling. And you know what's interesting is it doesn't play as a scary game, but I feel like it would be a scary experience. Like if you were really immersed into this, you would feel very uncomfortable. And I think because there's a lot of like the traditional Metroid gameplay mechanics of, you go into a room, there's a lot of like action. Like you're looking around, you're scanning stuff, you're shooting enemies. There's always there's enemies in every room, you know, some of them could be bugs, but small enemies, nothing like crazy or important. Finding out where to go, like there's exploration, so there's that intrigue, and you kind of know, like you have a map, which the map is absolutely awesome. You could do any future Metroid game, I will absolutely welcome if it's 3D. Just give me that map. It's so effective. It works well. It kind of lets you know where to go. Like you pull out your map and look around and figure out where to go next. So it doesn't feel like a horror game. And I think there's one of two ways you do that, is like really scary monsters that are trying to come and get you, where you have limited resources of dispatching them. And then two, it's dark and creepy and you're exploring, but things don't feel right. So it's not necessarily that things are like jumping out at you yet, but you're like, you don't feel comfortable anywhere you're at. You don't feel comfortable sticking still. And when you move forward, you're uncomfortable. You're like, ah, man, this is just an uneasy environment. But I feel like because of the Metroid mechanics, you get that feeling of solitude and isolation, but you don't get like fear. I never was like afraid to play this game, but it's not like happy. Like you, around the same time, you would have, you know, what was it, Super Mario Sunshine, and it's like, hey, we're on a beach, woohoo, waha, you know, Mario's having a great time. You know, it's very like campy, campy and bright. This is like the opposite. It's very dark and you're alone. But I thought they just did, you know, amazing with that feeling. So you could pull that feeling from the game with nobody saying any words. And I feel like that's, you know, artistic. Like that's how you view this video game, as an artistic piece. And, you know, sadly, the only way to get this out there is to print a bunch of copies and sell it. So it is a product as well. But all of the areas are all connected. So you have like elevators that go up and down in between these areas. So looking back, like when I played it at the time, the game felt absolutely massive, and I didn't really like understand like where to go. Like the game would give you hints, and I'd like explore around, but I wasn't like in my mind. I was thinking of like, okay, I'm in the Talon overworld or whatever. I'm going to keep exploring this area. Playing it again now with another, decade. No, another 2 decades. Oh my god. I feel very old. Another 2 decades of, gaming experience. I cannot believe that. Um, I understood the game better from the sunset or from the get go, however you want to say that. Um, and you might be in the main starting area and then be like, okay, I'm going to go to the Magmore Caverns. Okay, now I'm going to go to Fendrana Drifts. Now I'm going to go back to Magmore Caverns. And that's kind of like what you're doing. The game heavily is suggesting, like every once in a while, if you're exploring enough and you're not kind of on your way, you'll get a scan, incoming scan, and it puts a question mark of like where you should probably be heading to next. But it felt nice this time. I got lost like a couple of times throughout the game, but it felt nice to be in an area and be like, oh, I'll backtrack here. Some people don't like backtracking. So I'm going to talk about that because that was a gameplay mechanic that used to be unpopular, but I think that went away. I think people forget that backtracking used to be a thing in games. The RPGs, it was common. You would be somewhere or do something, and instead of progressing forward, you'd go back to an old area and something would be different. If it's done well, I like it. I feel like Metroid Prime does it well because the world is like a puzzle and it's all interconnected. So it doesn't feel like you're backtracking to some other area. Like, honestly, within a couple of minutes, you can pretty much be like, if you fire up the game wherever you're at, wherever you left your save off, within a few minutes you can be in the other area, and another minute or two you can be in another. Like, you can get around to the areas very quickly. So I liked it. I also liked that as you kind of got to a certain point, you're like, okay, now I could see as a new player this would be kind of intriguing. Like, it'll be nice getting different perspectives when my children are older, like when they're able to kind of play games like this a little bit more. So I want to, it would be very interesting to get like a new perspective, never having played Metroid Prime, playing it and seeing like how they felt about it. um just kind of like everything being connected, backtracking, how they would perceive it. I feel, and I really think it's great. It All of the areas are so unique too. So the only thing that might be confusing from that new perspective is if you don't know Metroid power ups, or you're not kind of catching on to their like, hey, this structure has bendesium or whatever the heck it's called, that metal that you have to. It's either you either blow it up with a power bomb or a super missile. I can't remember which one, but it's like, if you don't realize what that means, that you need a different power up, like you need to go find space jump or double jump or whatever it's called, then that might be a little confusing and that could lead to some frustration. What's also kind of interesting is, since it's in a 3D plane, first of all, jumping around and like platforming, I found very enjoyable. I would almost like less enemies if they just had like a bonus area where you could just like go jump around and explore. I think that would also be kind of fascinating and have less enemies. I'm one of the weirdos where if I played the entire game, and as I got to the end, that was finally when I was like, I gotta quit killing the enemies in every room every time. I'm like, unless you're locking a door on me and I have to kill you to pass, I gotta just run past you at this point. Um, so the platforming and exploration was very interesting. So with the platforming, you're in a 3D space, and I thought I would need double jump sooner than I like remembered. So you get the space jump, or I'm just gonna call it double jump because I can't remember what the actual, like, I think it's the space jump. It's like her little backpack that gives you the boost. But you can actually get around pretty far. Um, Looking around and jumping. It's also very interesting from the first person perspective. It's honestly I've never played another game like it where third the first person 3D platforming felt the way that it does. Like when you jump and you land on a platform, you hear like, the metal boots hit and you're like, it just has a unique feel. Like the platforming works really well, and it doesn't surprise me because Retro partnered with Nintendo on this one. I know they kind of developed everything, but I bet you Nintendo was like, you gotta listen, Mario's our mascot, you gotta keep your platforming kind of straight. um, but yeah, so you get around pretty far, but like I said, that new perspective of somebody coming in fresh, like would they feel frustration if they didn't know like what power up they needed to progress? Because basically it's like you get a power up and now any of the areas that you've been to with that new power up, they might be worth exploring again because you could have run past something and now you can go get some more missile packs, or you might be able to go progress the stage in another area. The only thing I can think of is that I really don't feel like I spent enough time in Phendrana Drifts. Like looking back, like I feel like I went through it really quick, so I can't remember if that area is shorter or if I missed some exploration here. But I felt like I that part was smaller than I remember. And can we just give some time? Okay. I do want to focus on bosses a little bit, but you go into Phendrana Drifts, and the music is incredible. If you have not listened to the music, Nintendo released an application for their music as part of the Nintendo Switch Online membership. If you have that, I would go and utilize that because it literally it's a Nintendo thing to do, but it's like a very cool application. Um, or just YouTube it. Like Phendrana Drifts just has such a good sound. You just have that sci-fi twang, like wow, like through it, and that's where you feel the isolation. It's pretty. That's when you feel really isolated. You're like, this place is crazy. There's all the snow. Snow levels rock. There's never enough. Give me a snow level any day. But Samus kind of goes in there, and it cuts to a quick cutscene. She's looking around, and then you just see a giant shadow of Ridley fly over. So if you don't know, who that is, you would just be like, "What the heck is this giant pterodactyl dragon-looking shadow flying over me? And why does it just happen?" And we move on, but you're like, "What?" You're like, "Oh, geez, okay, interesting." But I would say the boss fights are very unique and they're actually challenging. Some of the early ones, listen, I love video game boss fights. They can sometimes be kind of cheesy, and it's like, hey, hit something 3 times. And the giant plant boss, I'm gonna butcher these names. So it has these reflectors that shine sunlight onto, and it gets huge. So you shoot those down, and it withers down, right? So you have to turn into morph ball and go inside and like bomb the inside of it, basically. Very cool boss fight. I love it, but they get very difficult near the end. So I kind of want to focus on that a little bit, and then maybe talk about one of the areas, and then kind of wrap up. But the boss fights, when they said they were trying to make them challenging, I do feel they are challenging. Now this is where I like the platforming. I like being able to sidestep and everything like that. I enjoy being able to grapple hook around. Like I like all of that freedom, double jump. Like okay, let's go explore. Like I like that. I could almost deal with just like a complete DLC side level of like, hey, just go roam around and explore and scan stuff. I Even without killing enemies, the game would still be fun. Isn't that weird? um but in the more involved boss fights, the game does get a little bit trickier because you're either you sometimes you have to switch between scanners, sometimes you have to switch between weapon types, sometimes you have to use you want to use your super missiles. I did notice that's where it became more action oriented, is where the modern control scheme did have some trouble with. The boss fights also got tougher. So I'll give you an example, and they're not necessarily hard, but there's I told you they're putting Phazon and the Space Pirates. So you got your Omega Space Pirates, who are just these chunky guys, and they walk right towards you. Now you don't move super quickly. The quickest way to move in the game is honestly turn it to the morph ball and use your booster to boost away. But you're pressing different buttons for that, and it changes from first person to, third person, which honestly they handled that really well. I find that fascinating that there's like third person, elements to the control scheme. But you do that, and it just adds a little bit of confusion because like the boss will walk directly towards you. So those boss fights I found kind of annoying because they're walking directly towards you, so you can't create the gap. They're smashing electricity down, so you have to like double jump over the electricity and kind of like towards them. You have to switch between weapon types and kind of blow them up. Meanwhile, you can only shoot them at certain times because he has this like black hole on his hand, and it like when he's has his hand reached out, he sucks up all the weapons, so you can't damage him. So I did find that it was a little trickier and you're less mobile in those situations, and you can do that sidestep dodge, but with Metroid Prime 4 hopefully being a Switch 2 launch title, that would be incredible, or within the launch year, maybe some type of like boost. So you know how like Samus has a little jetpack booster, you can do the double jump. Like maybe you can do that side jump, but it boosts you further away, and you have a little bit more room for the boss arenas. I would have liked that. We mentioned Ridley, so I kind of want to wrap up here and kind of get to the end. So you go through all the areas, you're collecting the items, and the main goal is to find, I believe, 12 Chozo artifacts, and you take them to the Chozo temple, and after you find them all, you scan them all, and it's like, hey, you put all the the artifacts in, and then you go in the center, and I think it teleports you if I recall correctly. But first, you go in to do this, and Meta Ridley or Metal Ridley, I think it'd be Metal Ridley. So they take dead Ridley carcass, or was he always metal from the beginning? I actually don't know where Metroid Prime takes place in this story, but that's neither here nor there. So it's Ridley, but he's all metal. They gave him like missile launchers and boosters, like all this crazy stuff. He's basically like a pterodactyl dragon looking thing. He's terrifying. He does a ton of damage. The bosses, the real bosses, like near the end of the game, they do not mess around. Like you better be exploring and finding, your energy canisters, because on both of the final bosses, I died at least once. And now, like, I've already beat the game, so like I kind of knew what to expect kind of going in. But yeah, fighting Ridley was actually difficult. I died, and I thought the boss fight took a while too. So I haven't watched any speed runs, but just beating it the way that I did, I was like, dang, this is a long boss fight, because you can only damage him, basically hitting his mouth and hitting his chest. So after you damage his chest enough, he'll land, and you have to hit his mouth, and then you get like he's like protecting his chest, obviously, because he doesn't want to get shot in the heart and be melted. But that boss fight was no joke, and I think where I would like in Metroid Prime 4, like more of a defined boost to the side. I think that would be beneficial, because if you don't time when he like launches towards you perfectly, I got stuck on him and he starts like swinging his claws around. Like he actually did like, I think like two energy packs or 3 energy packs worth of damage. I was like, oh my God, he's freaking kicking my butt here. But what's interesting is you defeat Ridley, and you're like, holy smokes, that was awesome. That honestly, to me, that game could have ended there, and I'd been like, nice, what a cool boss fight. But there's one more thing you have to kind of tackle, which I also felt was difficult the first time. I did die on the first boss, but you fight Metroid Prime, so that's the whole point. Is through all this phase-on and craziness, they made they created a Metroid Prime, and it's this giant looking armored spider looking thing. In the first phase, basically what you're doing is you can see little eyes. It has a giant gaping mouth, but you can only damage it with the correct beam. So if it's purple, you use your wave beam. If it's red, you use the plasma beam, whatever it's called. You kind of like switch between those, and you can only damage it on the eyes, and it's bouncing around, and then it launches towards you, so you have to turn it to a spider ball or morph ball and go under it and everything like that. So that part was already interesting. Now, I died the first time. The second time doing it, I was like, wow, this was like, much easier because you're just kind of like doing the same thing. But Metroid Prime will also summon Metroids, which it's just like, oh my gosh, like, what are you doing here? And then it drops down into like a Phazon pit. And you go down, and now it's this weird squid like invisible looking thing where you can view it with your normal scanner or your normal visor, but sometimes it'll turn invisible and you'll need your thermal scanner or your X-ray scanner to view it. It's also dropping Metroids at the time, and the only way to damage it at this point is it will, it'll emit phazon. It'll create a pool of this like gooey liquid that supercharges your arm cannon. So you stand in it and you blast it and you just like electrocute it for like 6 to 8 seconds, and you just repeat, that kind of like flow, and then you eventually like kill the boss. If you get 100% too, I really wanted to be able to see that, but I don't feel like getting 100% in the game right now. Just limited time and everything. But you get Samus is on her ship, kind of like, looking down on the planet, takes her helmet off, and you get to like see her, without her visor and helmet on, which is like just a cool little Easter egg. So the final boss fight, I ended up dying on that one too and had to redo it and beat it. But just overall, the boss fights were very difficult. And I feel like they set out to make them difficult, and they succeeded in that. You know what I mean? So I thought it kind of matched their vision, where your exploration, you feel like solitude. And then when you finally like, hey, someone else is in the room with me. Yeah, but they're trying to kill me. Which is, really kind of, interesting. But I will kind of wrap up with my thoughts on the game and Samus as a character. My immediate takeaway with just how unique everything is, and, Samus as a female video game character, she's the type of character, outside of one bad Metroid game, that I would be like proud to show, my daughter. So to kind of put that into perspective, Samus is cool and strong and compassionate and brave just as a character. She's not brave for a female character. She's not cool for a female character. I feel like Nintendo has done a great job overall with her as a character, but especially, in Metroid Prime, where Samus is just a cool character with a lot of positive qualities, and it's nice to see that. I like it. I like the way that it was done, and I think she's just awesome as a character. I think there is something to not having your main character talk unless it's adding value. So I'm, replaying Metroid Prime 2. I'm replaying Mass Effect 2. And what I like about that character is lots of talking to your party, building rapport, etc. But you don't always need that. So this is a Metroid Prime. This is a prime example of not needing dialogue to tell a story or to flesh out a character, right? And my kind of last thoughts on the game are, I my fingers are crossed that Metroid Prime 4 is a good game. I have high hopes. I really want it to be true. Like, it's just Metroid Prime and Metroid Prime Remastered are generational based games that everyone should play, everyone should try. Even if it's not your cup of tea, at least look into it to see if it's something that you would play. It's very fascinating playing a game of this caliber again, or just playing it while I'm playing other games, and you're just like, wow, this is a really stinking good video game. And that's really where Metroid Prime is. It's still a good game. It's still incredible. It deserved all the critical acclaim. It deserved to be the best-selling Metroid game before Metroid Dread came out. Woohoo! That makes me happy to see too. But Metroid Prime on the Nintendo Switch is a game worth playing. and I was just absolutely fascinated and amazed with the experience. It's kind of funny when I went back and played it. I actually beat it in a short period of time, like a week or two, which is a short period of time for me now. But just playing it, just intermittently over the couple of weeks, was able to get to the end and very satisfied with the experience. So thank you so much for joining me on Gaming's Lost Memories. This is Big Reed, and I look forward to talking to you next time.